going on, everybody? Welcome in to the North End Podcast, episode 187. My name is Zach Graham, your host here in the North End, joined, as always, by my good buddy. He's on record as my best friend. His name is Ian Michaud, and we call him... coming together on another beautiful weekend here in Austin, Texas. I see you have decided to act up and wear your Lakers gear here on the show. I don't know if you're upset, maybe just, because I'm making good trades in our fantasy football league this week. Who knows what it is? Lakers beat the Spurs last night. How you feeling?
Oh, dude, this was just laying around. I didn't have this picked out or ready to go or anything like that. It's just had to have a shirt for the episode, So this is what we ended up with. I'm doing really well, man. We had a great night last night watching that cup game for the NBA. Not sure if there's a bunch of crossover with people who listen to our pod who love the NBA as much as we do and everything, but we're definitely big fans of the cup. So that was fun doing that. And overall just doing well, man. I like what you got scheduled here for us to chat about. Some nonsense that is based in sense, reality. So a little fun activity that I'm looking forward to. Hope everyone's doing well and just excited to get into it.
Yeah, I'm excited for this one too. I think nonsense based in sense could, make a pretty accurate description here. We're going to touch on, of course, the international results we've had so far here. We are smack in the middle of the international break globally. And then we're going to get into this nonsense, which is a mock offseason. We're going to go through the entire offseason, talk about how we think it could go, some of the moves maybe we would make if we were there in the room with Rodolfo Burrell. And then, of course, we do have the true nonsense second round voting in the goal of the year bracket wrapping up here this weekend. So we'll talk about that second round. We'll look ahead to the quarterfinal round. Just 8 goals remain. Before we jump into today's episode, just want to remind you all that the best way to support the show is by downloading the audio version of our episodes wherever you get your podcasts. And wherever you get your podcast usually has the ability to toggle on auto downloads. You can do that and support the show going forward without having to think about it. Again, you can go the extra mile, rate, review, and subscribe to the pod wherever you get your podcast. And if you're watching on the YouTube channel, subscribe to the channel. That does help us grow the show. You can hit the notification bell to know when a live stream pops up or a new episode goes live. And of course, on this episode, like the video, help us battle the YouTube algorithm overlords. Atone for your sins. Wash yourselves clean in the nonsense of the North End. So, Eve, we actually did get a little bit of a surprise here when it comes to our international results. Late in the week, it came out that the Black Stars, of course, the Ghanaian national team, had called up Osman Boukari kind of late there to join the squad for their final 2 AFCON qualifying matches. They took on Angola on Friday, and Buka over there, available off the bench, does get subbed in, plays 9 minutes as a substitute in a 1-1 draw against Angola. Osman connected on 2 of his 3 pass attempts, 4 touches, 1 pass into the final third. Did not see a ton of action in his abbreviated stint there, and that draw, he eliminated Ghana from AFCON qualifying contention. Ghana will play again on Monday against Niger, 10 a.m. Central Time. So hopefully we see Abuka start there, because I know that he hasn't really, I think this is his first appearance for the national team since they changed coaches. And so if he's able to go out there, get some extended minutes, get some good, put some good film out there for the coaches to consider going forward. Again, we want to see all of our guys have as many opportunities as possible with their national teams.
Yeah, that's a nice little surprise there. Bummed to see that they got knocked out, but happy Buka got some time. And like you said there, if he's able to get back into this rotation, that's really what we want to see here ultimately. Do you know who got the start over him by chance? Or
I don't. I wasn't looking. I mean, we know that their wing position is extremely stacked, right?
Yes.
Right. Joseph Paintsil is another guy who is not a game in, game out starter for them. And that's, Ghana, I think, has kind of been known for their attacking depth chart, not just the wingers, really over the last couple decades. but maybe something now, right? Because he hasn't been called up I think it's the previous 2 windows.
Mm-hmm.
I had stopped really paying attention to who was getting run above him or even the call-ups, right? So maybe something we get more into if he continues to get these call-ups going through next year.
Looks like 2 dudes who are in the Premier League. You got a Wolfsburg guy, or Elfsborg, and Leicester City.
Okay, so you've got
guys on the wing there.
Leicester's up there. Elfsborg is, what is that, Dutch or German?
I'm really showing my Swedish.
Oh, there you go.
So definitely not not the Premier League, but sounds like those 2 guys are pretty solid players.
Yeah, well, and you weren't off on Leicester there. Leicester has made their way back to the Premier League here, so 1 for 2. We've certainly done worse on things like that before. We'll come back to CONCACAF here. Nations League, first leg, I believe, of this matchup for Costa Rica. Of course, Julio Cascante called up to Los Ticos. And against Panama, again, 2 legs here. The first one was on Thursday. Julio gets the start for the first time in a long time.
Yeah.
Plays the full 90 against the Panamanians. 1-0 loss for Costa Rica here in the first leg. But Julio, at least on paper, played pretty well. Hit 90% of his passes, 35 out of 39 attempts. 4 passes into the final third, 1 chance created, and then defensively 2 clearances, an interception, and 2 recoveries. Again, a loss here in the first leg for Costa Rica. They're back in action against Panama for that second leg on Monday, and I really hope we see another Julio start. That was pretty encouraging for me.
Yeah, that sounds like a really solid performance there. Congrats, Julio.
Of course, Bobo out there with the Cranes of Uganda. Bobo plays 34 minutes as a substitute in a 2-0 loss to South Africa. Bobasi, 11 of 14 passes in his 34 minutes. That's 79%. 3 of those passes into the final third. Also had 2 interceptions, 3 recoveries, and was 3 for 3 on his ground duels. Despite the loss, Uganda qualifies for the 2025 AFCON tournament due to Congo's loss to South Sudan. So Uganda will close out qualifying against Congo on Tuesday morning. But that's just for funsies. We're already through. So congrats to Bobo and Uganda.
Man, I'm just really hoping we can get some minutes for him next year with the first team. I'd love to see him in some sort of action just to really see what how he looks out there. Because we had a couple call-ups, you saw Alonso out there, and it just looked like he kind of belonged. And I think Bobo is in that same category.
Yeah. Well, and I think he's in the list of guys that I would have from Austin FC too, right? Alonso, right? He might be going back to Atlas because his loan is over, if I recall correctly. But Alonso, Bobo, some of those new additions last year too could make some sense, right? If you get them that green card so they don't take up an international slot for the first team, those 2 that you mentioned, Ruben Bonachera, Nico Van Rijn, guys that really impressed us as new additions this past year. So, and obviously we're going to talk supplemental roster here in a minute, but closing out the international results, we know Jimmy Farkalin was called up to the Liberian team, was not in the team for their 1-0 win over Togo. Liberia actually eliminated, despite the win, from qualifying contention because Equatorial Guinea got a draw against first place Algeria. So Liberia will take on Algeria on Sunday, so this weekend, and that reveals we are recording again on Saturday here. So we will jump in with any late breaking news on Sunday if that happens between now and when the episode is released. But congrats to all those guys, no matter how much they played, no matter how successful their national teams were here on the first game of the international break. It's just awesome to see these guys getting this action, especially in the offseason, right? A little bit less concerned about the bumps and bruises here in November. We'll be paying attention to all those games here in the early part of this week.
Absolutely. Keep that rust off and, keep playing out there. We like that.
All right, let's get into this mock offseason here, E. And you and I have kind of discussed the points of emphasis that we want to touch on here, some of the moves that we want to make. Again, we are putting the North End, and I notice I have the old, I have the different name here on the YouTube, so we'll switch that over, and we'll jump into the mock off season. So, again, if you have been listening to the North End week in and week out, you may already be familiar with some of the things we are dealing with here. Austin FC at present has 4 senior roster slots available and 5 supplemental roster slots available. Austin had a DP slot and 3 U22 slots available, or we can have 4 U22s and $2 million in general allocation money. We also have 2 available international slots. So I think the first move that I want to make here, is I want to say we are going to take the 3-3 route with our roster construction and leave the 2-4 GAM route in the past. How does that sound to you?
I really don't know. I don't know how I feel about which route to take here. I think, both positions provide some advantages for us. I know that we have a lot of holes that we need to fill. And I know that a solid 9, a DP 9 is at the top of our priority list. But looking at, potentially having 4 U22 guys plus that $2 million in GAM might allow us to fill the holes that we have, particularly in the midfield here, with some younger talent, which eventually leads to, potentially being able to sell these guys later on. But for the sake of the exercise, I will go with the DP slot as well with the 3 U22s and go the 3-3 route there. But I just think that the avenues that we have and the ways that we can approach rebuilding this roster here in this offseason, this very critical offseason now, because you're starting to see a lot of these guys come off the books that we wanted to get rid of. I just like that we have these options available. And I just want to salute MLS for this kind of like change up here, for all the shit that we give the league and like the flaws that take place here. Like obviously with the playoffs now just in a hiatus, which is absolutely insane and ridiculous. I thought that this was a really smart kind of game plan for teams to be able to improve their rosters. And I know that DP slot, it's shiny, it's bright. You want to get a guy in there who not only puts butts in the seats, but puts balls in the back of the net. Yeah. So like, I understand that. But I just think I'm feeling really good about where we're at with how we can approach this. So
I like good about the flexibility that Roto has, right? Yeah. He could take either road. And I think to me, like, maybe this time last year, if we had these rules in place, I think the U22 would have been the route we took. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily to bring those U22s in, but because we were right up against the cap, we know that, we have our best guesses on how Roto used that additional $1 million in GAM that we got from the 2-4 route in the summer. But because of the lack of senior roster spots and the ample cap space that we project the team to have right now on our roster sheets at the northendpodcast.com, to me, it's actually less of a decision. To me, it's very clear that it is time to finish the rebuild, use the cap space, use the DP slot that we have. And like I've said a couple of times here, time for, Tio Tony and the ownership group to open up the pocketbook for some of these international transfers. Of course, we'll get to that once the international window opens up here in our mock off season. But so we will take the 3-3 route here and have that open DP slot, 3 U22 slots.
I just wouldn't be bummed if we went either way, really. You know what I mean? Sure. Like you said, I think that is clear now. I think we're at the point where it's like you can push this team over the top by bringing in one of the top caliber DP slots and filling that with a 9 that we can really, really get some use out of. So I do think that that's probably the route that the office and the management is going to take here. But I just wouldn't be upset if we did either option. I think that there's just a lot of ways that you can look at this and approach this.
Yeah. Well, and you would think too, if you do take the 2-4 GAM route, that then you would be expecting the flurry of U22s. Like I would expect us to then fill at least 3 of those, if not all 4.
Yeah, would love to see that. Because I mean, we have the oldest roster in the league. You can bring that down, get these guys kind of in here, or one of the oldest rosters. I don't know if we still are at this point. But,
right. When we've jettisoned a couple 30-year-olds, 30-plus-year-olds. So that number is certainly down now. But you might fill those spots with equally old guys if this doesn't go the way we think.
True.
But let's look at the cap before we jump into the offseason calendar as well. Because again, this is our best estimate that we have here at the northendpodcast.com. And I want to take some liberties here in terms of the cap hits that we don't know yet, right? We know Danny signed a contract extension. We know that's coming with some form of a raise here. off of his $138,000 and some change in terms of his guaranteed compensation last year. He's on a senior spot now. So we're going to assign Danny a $500K salary and therefore cap hit right around where Dessler comes in, right? Give or take. So we project right now 3.63 million in total budget space available. So that could be salary cap, that could be general or targeted allocation money, 3.63 million. So that, of course, would take us down to 3.13 million in that space, giving Danny a $500,000. We also know that especially those Claudio Reyna contracts have built-in increases to them, but it doesn't. That I don't think is unique to Claudio's regime, right? We see Jader Obrian when we pick up his option in the re-entry draft last year, his number went up, and I think we will see some increases for Roto's contracts as well, because a number of those guys definitely deserve the raises. So let's give the existing senior roster contracts a blanket 10% increase. Okay, so those guys, right, we don't need to factor in the DPs, right, because those guys only hit at the max cap hit. But Cascante, Väisänen, Obrian, Stuver, Rubio, Gallagher, Cleveland, Biru, Kolmanich, Heinzike, Dessler, Svatok, that'd be an additional 412,000 and some change onto our cap hit. Takes us down to $2.71 million in cap space here. So how do you feel about those estimates there?
I think those are great estimates because I would assume they're probably on the higher side, and I want to be able to come in here with an actual budget that makes sense. Like we talked about with Danny on a previous episode, it'd be hard to see him coming in much higher than Dessler and Svatok are hitting the books right now. So I like that. Baking in those blanket raises for a bunch of guys, I think makes a lot of sense. Obviously, as people go through their contracts, they get elevated pay. So yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense for us here.
All right, so now we arrive November 27th. So about 10 days from now is the deadline to exercise options and submit bona fide offers. I'm going to toss it to you. Obviously, Roto has already announced the roster decisions, but we are going to here again with 4 senior slots open and 5 supplemental slots. We're going to take a look first here at our supplemental slot. So you, my assistant to the assistant GM here, E, what's our move going to be here on deadline day?
So first, I think it's Hector, right? We're looking at bringing him back on a supplemental role. We understand that, he's obviously an aging player, an older player in this league, but we like the locker room presence that he has. And also the spot minutes that he was able to put in last season were more than fine in the times that we really needed him. And I think that he's a guy that you can call on. And if you're in a pinch, if you're in one of those really brutal stretches during the season where you've got 3 games in like 8 days or 14 days, whatever
during
it is.
An international break, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. When guys are out of town and everything. So I think that locking him into a supplemental spot makes a lot of sense here. And it looks like that's what the team wants to be doing with him. Otherwise, I think we would have heard already with the flurry of news that came in, particularly last week, that we would have been moving on from Hector. So I think it's safe to say that he's going to be on a supplemental spot going forward here.
All right, so we've re-signed Hector Jimenez to his senior minimum salary supplemental slot. So we've got 4 supplemental slots left, and of course, those slots do not count against the cap. So I want to stick with the supplemental roster here. I think our next move as a mock front office here, E, let's sign Irvin Torres to a homegrown first-team deal. Of course, Absolutely. He will not count against the cap, and that will take us down to 3 supplemental slots. So, again, these guys were Irvin kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, but, again, a body who looks fine. Like, you don't see it as a black hole out there. It's not like you're playing 10 on 11 with Hector out there. It's not like you're playing 10 on 11 with Irvin Torres out there. Again, it's a small sample size that we saw of him at the end of the season, but more than held his own. So 3 supplemental slots left.
And I mean, with Irvin, you see his potential, you know the age, so he's going to continue to develop not only with his skill set, but physically as well, meet the demands of being able to play in this league on a night-to-night basis as he goes through this process of being worked up the ranks onto the first team. So I'm very excited for Irvin, and having him on a homegrown is even more exciting, in my opinion.
All right, so we'll go while we're doing this. I'm gonna go ahead and make the change. We'll put Irvin Torres in here. So I don't think anybody on their Saturday afternoon is perusing the North End cap sheets. So we'll muck these up a little bit for the purposes of our YouTube audience. Heading into December, right? December is where all of the weird MLS action happens. We have our December 9th half-day trade window, which is, it's a little fun.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go out on a limb and say we don't have any activity during that window. That could, certainly something could come out of left field through a number of these MLS processes, right? But half-day trade window, I don't think people are really knocking down our door for some of the guys that we would have in the shop window, to use the same phrase that I used last week about Danny.
Yeah, I agree there. I think there's obviously some candidates that you would hope to be able to move on from, and I just don't know if there's an avenue with a trade to make that makes a lot of sense here. But like if you jump back to the cap sheet, if you really want to optimize this team and you really want to make it uber efficient, you look at row 6 and 7 there on that cap sheet list, and you have 2 center backs who are otherwise average mid kind of performers for this league, and one guy in Leo who really had a difficult season that culminated with what we thought was him quitting on his teammates and his team. And I just don't know if that's something that you can come back from. But again, I don't think that there's a lot of trade interest there. But those are 2 guys that I'm looking at and kind of targeting in this offseason, that if you can get some sort of return, some sort of sale on either of them, I think that that's really good business, because we found defenders, or at least Roto found defensive players that were fantastic for us in Biru and BHI this last season. You solidify that back line now with Dessler and Svatak, and you're looking at a really formidable defensive unit. So like to really cut some fat and like really have it be peak efficiency, maybe get selected for the Department of Government Efficiency, you go ahead. Get Roto a cabinet spot. You go ahead and you move on from Cascante or Vyson in one fashion or another. Again, I've said this 3 times. I just don't think that there's a trade available for either of those guys.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about those 2 guys here in a second, because after that half-day trade window, 2 days later is the expansion draft for San Diego FC. So we've talked about who we would potentially protect on a previous episode of the North End, but just a reminder, auto-protected are Owen Wolf, Damian Loss, and Micah Burton with their homegrown status. We're still unsure about CJ Fodre because, and again, stop me if you've heard this before, there are some inconsistencies between the league-managed roster page that say that CJ is in supplemental slots 25 through 28. The expansion draft rules say a GA player is only auto-protected if they are in slots 21 through 24 on the supplemental roster. The team-managed roster profile does not specify. So I'm going to, for the moment, and maybe foolishly, trust the league page that says he is not in those spots that he needs to be in. And so CJ is not auto-protected for us. If he is, fantastic, because then we don't have to use a spot and we can keep our young prospect that I think you and I still very much both believe in becoming a contributor to this first team down the road.
Look, man, we talked about this expansion draft with San Diego, and we know where CJ's from. We know his roots and his ties to that community. So I am a bit nervous that he might get snatched up here. And I think that would actually hurt more from the roster construction standpoint than it does from what you're losing production wise on the pitch, just given the fact that he's on that supplemental spot. You see the limited amount of spots available on the senior roster and like what you're going to do moving forward to potentially replace him. And then also you factor in the trajectory that he has had, and you would hope to be seeing him turn a corner here more than he already has this last season, which I think was a really great season where he was just absolutely dominating the next pro level, like on an incredible streak and hot run there to close out that season. So I think CJ, the potential of losing him is really, it's a bit daunting for me because I don't want to lose him. And I don't think this would be a situation where you would lose him if this team wasn't from San Diego, like starting in San Diego. That is just a factor that needs to be taken into account. And how much they're actually going to value that when they're building out that team is yet to be seen. But I hope that he is not picked up here in this draft. And I will go ahead and say that I think he's going to be available if that's the way that these inconsistent charts have him ranked right now.
Yeah. Well, I think too, like, we're in the room with Roto right now here on episode 187. So I think what I would be discussing is, or at least bringing to the table, is like, maybe these guys do want CJ. Maybe CJ wants to go back home and play for this team in his hometown, a hometown that no longer has a professional team, to my knowledge, from the major American professional sports, right? So San Diego FC coming, like, kind of replacing the Chargers who left a few years ago. I don't know, but I could see him wanting to leave. And so, like, if that's the case, then let's make a deal. Like, because I'm fine with that if we get something back for him.
Yes.
But all that we have invested into his development, wherever you are as a fan or as the player in CJ, like, however you feel about the development to this point, like, we have invested resources into him, and I would want to see something from the last couple of years for CJ. So I'm not against, a trade there for some GAM. But I'm with you. I think, you go through this list. I think 11 of these are pretty much no-brainers. Driussi, Bukhari, Dessler, Svatak, Stuver, Danny, Biru, Galley, Obrian, Heinzike, Rubio, right? I think we're not leaving those guys on new extensions exposed, I don't think so. That is 11. We only have one more to protect, and no Leo, no Julio, no CJ on that list. And I think for me now, I believe I had a different answer. I think I was protecting CJ when we did this about 6 weeks ago. I think now Leo is the one that I would protect, because I think he's the one that can bring the biggest return in a potential sale or trade. And again, I do think that would be sale back to Europe, overseas, and you get, maybe you get surprised with a Romagna-esque deal where we're like, we would take almost anything for it. And then the number comes in that Roto was able to receive, and it's, a good surprise. So that's, I guess, why I would protect Leo with our 12th slot there. What are your thoughts on slot 12?
Look, I think I would choose Julio in this situation. And everything that you say, the points you made there in regard to potentially getting something back for Leo, I think are valid and definitely in play here. I just need to know more about this situation with Leo. Is it Austin? Was it Josh? What was going on here? Is he homesick? You know what I mean? Like, because he hurt his value.
He did
by how he closed out the end of this last season. He hurt his value. He tanked his value. And I don't know if a team like San Diego is going to want to take a risk on a guy like that, who seems a bit disgruntled and probably wants to be back where he came from or over in Europe in some sort of capacity. Now, I'm just speculating here, but I think that story runs a bit deeper than he was banged up. And then we get the quote from Josh where it's like Leo's team made this decision to shut him down. Right. So I think that if you're going to roll the dice a little bit here and you don't want to get too cute with losing a potential rotational spot starter, you got to keep Julio. You got to protect Julio in this situation. Hope that Leo just kind of gets brushed by in this upcoming expansion draft. And then you go ahead and try to make that sale later.
Right. And that makes sense. And even if Leo was selected, we are opening up more valuable roster space if he is selected compared to Julio because of that international slot.
Correct.
And of course, both of them on what we consider slightly bloated contracts for their expected roles going forward. So expansion draft happens again. The likelihood is, and we'll knock on wood here, the likelihood is the team does not get touched, and only one player can be selected. If San Diego takes one of our guys, the rest of the team becomes protected. So the next day, free agency opens, and we have the end of year waivers process. So we have gone through the waivers process before to pick up somebody like Sofyan Jafal. Of course, we have picked up MLS free agents before, and I would not be surprised to pick up one or two here. But I think, that we're looking for free agents that will come on a senior minimum salary to be on that supplemental roster, not count against our cap, because we have, at least you and I here in the mock front office today, we have bigger plans for those senior spots. So I actually want to come back to that later on. I think, again, the guys that we're targeting in free agency, probably not highly sought after. So we're going to put that on the back burner for now, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, I just pulled up the free agent list for 2025 here, just perusing that a little bit. But yeah, I'm totally fine with that.
So then we have re-entry draft. Stage 1 is on December 13th. Stage 2 is on December 19th. We have, of course, also participated in this MLS quirk before last year. This is where we got Hader Obrian after Dallas declined his option. So potentially, of course, we're going to do our due diligence here in the front office during all of these MLS mechanisms here in the offseason, but I don't think it's likely that we are targeting players in this re-entry draft. Again, outside of maybe guys who would be a fit on that supplemental roster. But I think the next serious thing here is December 20th, 2025 MLS Super Draft, Austin FCE. We've got the 12th pick of the first round this year. And so I think we are looking for a player who will sign, and this is very hard to do in the MLS Super Draft, but it can be done even at the 12th pick. Looking for a player, I think, that will sign a reserve minimum salary on a supplemental slot and not count against our cap. But again, one of those guys that will be able to be used as a body that doesn't create a massive gap on the field. Again, very tough to do that.
Yeah.
And the likelihood and reality may be that Roto tries to sell it. I don't think we're getting another $250,000 in GAM for the 12 spot like we did for the 5 spot last year for Nate Jones. But maybe $50K, maybe $100K if there's a team that's out there targeting somebody at this 12 spot. Of course, we don't have the Generation Adidas class named yet. That comes the week of the draft, if I recall correctly. And we haven't dove too deep into the actual prospects yet, which, if you're a veteran of the Northland podcast, we will have probably an entire episode going through and getting entirely too excited about some of these draft prospects. But just going back through here, 2023, we traded up to the 13th pick for $100K in GAM. That was $50K split over 2 seasons. To draft the GA class member CJ Fodre. In that draft, names like Herbert Ndeli, who's with FC Dallas, right? First and second team guy. Emeka Anelli, a breakout stud for RSL in their midfield this season. Those guys went after CJ in that draft. The year prior, the actual 12th pick was Patrick Schulte, MLS champion goalkeeper for Columbus Crew. Simon Betcher was drafted. Again, that was a homegrown deal with Vancouver. But Tani Oluwasi with Minnesota, drafted later than Schulte, later than the 12th pick in 22. And then, of course, this past season, you look at guys like a Logan Farrington at pick 3, a Malachi Jones at pick 7. These guys, again, higher than the 12th pick, but didn't go number 1 and made massive impacts on their teams. Logan Farrington, 5 or 6 goals for the FC Dallas first team, also helped their second team bring home the cup 2 weeks ago. Putting that Logan Farrington down there with North Texas feels like a cheat code. And then Malachi Jones, right, scored multiple goals for NYCFC before breaking his leg in a collision with Mason Stidehar this year. So all that to say, it is possible to find a usable piece in this draft, even at the 12th pick. So again, I think here we're talking about what positions are we chasing, And I think for me, center back or a forward would make the most sense, even with the midfield help that we do need right now. I think the potential spot minutes for a forward or for a center back, maybe a little bit better to use this draft pick to reinforce those positions and their depth charts and deal with the midfield here when we get to the transfer window.
Yeah, that was going to be my question to you before you presented it to yourself there. Like we understand that there are guys to be found in this draft that if you can get them and they can make an impact, that's great. More often than not, that is not how that works out. But to me, it's more important to be targeting the position that we want to get. And I don't think I want to target a center back.
Okay.
I think in a perfect world, you target a 9. And I
Okay.
think that also gives you the signal that you're going to use your buyout on G eventually.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So I think
Yeah.
that gives you the opportunity to get like in this practice we're doing here, we're eventually
Yeah.
going to get to the point where we're targeting a DP9. I think if you go ahead and preemptively snag one here in this draft, you're signaling that you're going to use that buyout on G to get $1 million freed up in cap space. And we love G, but that's a good chunk of change to be able to work with to improve this roster where we know we have plenty of holes. So I would like to target a 9 there. I don't know if what happened with Kippy was something that's kind of impacting my decision here, and like the questions around that. Like, do you want to because like it's a quote unquote old man position a little bit. It's something you need a lot of reps at.
Unless you're Moise Bombito, I guess.
Yes, again, there are outliers to this and everything, but I would want to go for a 9 here, or some sort of a winger potentially as well.
Yeah. Well, I think with the 9, right, if we're going to go that route here at the 12th pick, I think we're looking for the physical profile, a target man that we could throw on late, right? Maybe when you go double striker at the end of a match, and just need those bodies where we're going to be lumping in crosses trying to find a late equalizer, which makes some sense, right? You're not counting on this pick to play really almost any minutes at all, but I think that is a profile of a player that we could use, especially if that buyout does, like you suggested, maybe that buyout does get used on Zardes. Because again, like I don't think you then feel comfortable with the 12th pick being our third string striker. So maybe you bring in another supplemental guy or another, a free agent, right? Maybe I don't know, Jeremy Abobasi comes on a discount. That's the one striker I know is a free agent in my head. But that will be something we can deal with when we know who is declined from all of these teams' options in 10 days. So we've got the 12th pick. We've got him signed to a supplemental spot there. And that takes us down to just 2 supplemental spots remaining. And now the international transfer windows pretty much throughout the globe, I believe, open in the big leagues on New Year's Day. So we'll just say we're into January here. The international transfer window opens. And then I want to give us the grace as the pretend front office here. I'm going to say we announce a green card for Hader Obrian. And it could be for any one of these 6 international guys, but I think Hader makes the most sense. He's the one that has been here the longest. And again, I don't know what all goes into this process between a franchise and the league and the government for this green card process, but I think OB makes the most sense to me, just speculating here. So that would open up a 3rd roster slot here for us. So we can go ahead. We will just, for right now, we'll delete this. We'll shift up. We've got that extra international slot here in our mock offseason. So I'll toss it to you. I'll give you the reins. We've got, what did we say? We're 2.71 million, I think is our, 2.71 million in cap space. We got a DP slot. We got 3 U22s, 4 senior slots, 2 supplemental slots. Where are you steering the ship here as the international window opens?
Right towards a high quality striker. Directly towards it. Setting
we
course.
Say Dutch here?
Would love some Dutch in the rotation here for sure. But a player that meets that profile. You're looking overseas. You're looking at some of the higher leagues over there. Duke's obviously in the Bundesliga right now, performing very well. Like that's the profile we want to get, and that is where I think that we need to open up the checkbook and make sure that we are bringing in a high quality, top class kind of player. Because you have these guys around him now that you're going to be able to get this, whoever this DP9 is, you're going to be able to get him really high quality service. And we've seen what Seba can do and work with when he has some surrounding pieces that are attacking style, aggressive kind of players that want to get into the fold, want to get into the action when we had the magical MVP-esque run from him. So that is the top priority for me. I think that prioritizing that also provides enough leeway on the back end here where you start to look at the midfield. That's definitely going to need some help and improvement. But I think that is a spot where I'm much more satisfied getting a veteran MLS guy who could be a bit older. You're in your 30s, what have you. I think that's a spot where you want to have a guy who has found his voice on a team, is able to be a solid leader, and is just going to give you non-error minutes where it's this is the guy that we can just count on to plug in there. So I think targeting the DP9 now and then shifting our attention backwards to that midfield after that would make the most sense for me.
So, right, signing international DP striker, of course, as we have on the screen here, right, takes up one of those international slots. So we've got 2 of those left. We're now full on designated players, and we've got 3 senior slots left. A designated player next season will come with a $743,000 cap hit, which takes us down to $1.967 million in budget space. So we'll take turns here. I'm not going to go quite to the mid. I'll let you deal with the midfield next.
Okay.
I'm breaking into the U22s here because we do have those 3 slots, and I think we've got some money to spend here. So I'm going to go to our left wing and sign a U22 prospect. Again, if you're thinking about the left wing right now, Haider Obrian and John Gallagher, probably the 2 guys that would be competing for the starting spot. Of course, CJ Fodre in that mix as well. I think you'd be hard-pressed to say that he's the favorite for that spot right now. But we know John Gallagher, of course, he said, he's on the record, he prefers the right side, even though he can play on both, and he's more than willing to play on both. Haider Obrian, also a more right-sided winger, can play on the left, but I don't think that's ideal. So that's why I want to bring this U22 high caliber, high ceiling type of player in here to compete and hopefully win that left wing starting spot on opening night. So, of course, this will come with a transfer fee, but that won't hit our cap because U22s, similar to DPs, right? We're going to get that special cap relief. So no matter what you pay him, and you can pay these U22s up to the max cap hit. So this player could be making $743,000 next year, but it only gives us $200K against our cap. So of course, fills a U22 slot. We'll say U22 winger here on the sheet, U22 winger in the U22 spots, and that takes up another international slot. So we have now $1.767 million in space, 2 U22 slots, 2 senior slots, and 1 international slot. And now you have mine and Rodolfo's permission to talk to us about the midfield.
Well, I'm looking at the free agent list here for MLS guys, and Felipe's on there.
Well, Felipe's still in action right now with Orlando, and Orlando might be the favorites to come out of the East at this point, and that's that Felipe Martins Wuju, man.
Look, we need some of that back, but if you can find a way to get him back, that'd be great. I will go ahead and take a look at getting some help in the midfield. I'm not sold on making it a U22 initiative, though.
Okay. Yeah. Right.
I might save that for you coming up here. But if you
you were sorry to interrupt. You were talking about, right, you want that more like veteran stable presence in the midfield next to what you think is Seba and Danny, right, in those midfield spots.
Yes. I think there's just a good amount of guys you could even target in the league, like I said, that have some sort of, veteran MLS kind of experience that you can get in here that would be advantageous for this roster build. Because again, when we talked about the departure of Alex and, the lack of counting stats that we had from him, we are going to have this potential leadership void created with his departure. Now, I do think, and I have gone on record saying this previously, that Svatak is going to step up into a much more leadership kind of role. I could actually see him earning the captain's band for this team and being the kind of guy that is our voice. But I'm going to go ahead and try to find an MLS vet, defensive-minded kind of midfielder here to fill out that 19th senior roster spot. Just looking at some names that are on this free agent list here. You got Rusnak, which I wouldn't really mind. There's a couple other. Well, Rusnak's more of a forward playing player, right?
Yeah, he's more of an attacking mid.
So there's just you got João Paulo, who I know is older, but like
but that
still
would be...
has it. That's the one for me that really sticks out. You got João Paulo, yeah. So that's the kind of profile. Who was the name we brought up last episode that we were kind of rumored towards
in the midfield? Oh, Annabelle
yeah.
Godoy. Yeah.
Again, it's not a, you're not buying a Porsche here. You're getting a Toyota Corolla you're gonna be able to run it and it's gonna work. You got names like Alejandro Bedoya out there. So there's guys that you can go ahead and get and find that I think would be fine. Ilie Sanchez is out of contract. There's players. So that's what I would prioritize. I want to find a defensive midfielder that not only is going to be able to give us some high quality minutes in the defensive side on the defensive side of the ball, but can also, like we've seen with Danny, right? Like you've seen a bit of his immaturity. He needs a little bit of a leadership. You can find a veteran that can kind of like work with him, coax him, and elevate his game. I think that's a win-win situation.
Yeah. So I'm not familiar with the cap hits this past year on Ilie Sanchez or João Paulo. I feel like it would be tough to pry Paulo away from Seattle, probably on both sides from their franchise point of view and the player, since he's been there for so long. Maybe Ilie, right? I'm
just saying that's more the profile I'm looking at. Not necessarily like João Paulo would be awesome. Ilie Sanchez would be awesome. But those are the kind of names, like that's the profile I'm kind of looking for.
Right. That makes sense. Can I entice you? Can I just look, I talked to Roto last night. We had a little cocktail. We were just thinking about the roster, how we can make this all work. We still have that international slot, right?
Yep.
And we're still working with here we said 1.767 million here, and just the 2 senior spots left if we say that we haven't signed this midfielder yet. So can I sell you on going and buying a TAM level midfielder from Europe? Like, I know it's mid-season over there, so like this is not necessarily how. And look, I'm working on our boy Roto here, like paying the transfer fees on anybody but the the DP level players or distressed assets coming out of war-torn Ukraine. Like we haven't really been paying these transfer fees for the new acquisitions, but I think a transfer fee is likely needed if we grab an international here in the midfield, because from the global soccer calendar, it's mid-season for most of these teams, right? You're not going to be able to walk on a free in the middle of the year. So let me just, for our purposes here, let's have some fun. Let's say we get a TAM midfielder in this 19th slot.
Okay.
And let's say it's an international. So now we're out of international slots, right? But let's estimate a $1 million salary here for this player. Like I don't really have a name off the top of my head. I don't know if this guy's TAM or DP or not, but like a Cedric Tukert for St. Louis, who they bought in the middle of the year, like an Edward Leuven, right? I know that he has been a DP for them, but I think he's on a million and a half in terms of his salary, if I recall correctly. Like maybe one of these guys from the top end of the Bundesliga 2 or some league like that, right? Where we can get him on like $1 million salary. Of course, that's a max cap hit, $743K. But because he's not a DP, we have to use TAM to cover the rest. So he would fill that international slot, that senior slot, down to 1 senior, no international slot. And with that $1 million cap hit, $767,000 left in cap space. But also, again, we know how MLS math works. If we paid a transfer fee, which we think we would have to on a player like this, let's say it's $1.5 million transfer fee. I don't know if it would come in much higher or much lower than that, but just for our estimate purposes, let's put his contract to that 27 with an option for 28, that same window as the guys we have signed over the last 6 to 8 months. So that gives us an additional $375K, the amortized transfer fee over that 4-year contract. So that would actually take us down to $392K in cap space here. Ian, I know that, right? That's a small number to be looking at here, but we only have the 1 senior roster spot left, and we know that the 2 supplementals, if we do fill those out, don't count against the cap. So for me, this makes sense as long as we have ownership's backing to splash this cash around, because we have the cap space. We know this is going to be a player that profiles as somebody that is a game in, game out starter for us over the length of this contract. So I would feel confident if our scouting team has the player and we can make the deal with his team and his club, then I would rather swing a bit harder, a bit more for the fences, so to speak, with a TAM level midfielder here from the international level. Is that, can we do that with this roster spot?
Yeah, for sure. The only thing that held me up with that, and the reason why I kind of went MLS vet here, is because I wanted that international slot, that last one, to be used on a U22 guy. I think that's where you want to hit your U22 with some international dudes. Obviously, we know the U.S. men's national team, and everything like that. Those guys are international slot players. But yes, I'm totally fine with this. And if you go ahead and open up the checkbook here to get a guy who is a night in, night out starter in that midfield, which we're going to desperately need, then I do think you can get away with the rotation that you're going to have on the wing with your Bukas, your Johnny G's spot work, the U22 winger you already got there, O'Brien as well. So I'm totally fine with that.
Yeah, I think right, because that brings us down to this final senior roster slot. So you mentioned I would love to get this second U22 in here. And I think we can. Of course, we'd have to find another international roster slot. So can you get a green card for a Biru, a Dessler, a Buka, a Svatak, right? Can you sell Leo? Because if you sell Leo, it's not just that you get that international slot, but you get the additional roster slot and that salary relief. And that's why I'm not so concerned about going after this TAM level midfielder, because we have ways, even if we can't sell Leo or get a green card for any of these existing international slot guys, we also have the buyout in a pinch that can open up not just that roster slot, but the cap space needed to probably sign multiple players after that. So that's why I'm leaning more towards that TAM midfielder and then figuring out what to do with the second slot. So let's say we are able to get another green card. Let's say we get one for Biru, right? Or Dessler, whoever it is. Then we have the space to sign a U22 to this final slot. So let's just say we do that, right? Let's say we had a really good offseason here. Our legal team is working like crazy, and they bring us another U22 midfielder after we free up a green card slot from one of those players. Of course, transfer fee, right? International slot. We'll add him here too, U22 midfielder, and we'll replace. We'll say it was Dessler that got it. We'll say that's our U22 midfielder slot. So cap wise, right? Transfer fee. We could pay him up to the max cap hit. He's only gonna hit the cap, our budget, at $200K, and we know that we still had $392K left. So this takes us down to $192,000 left in cap space. No more senior slots, no more international slot. We have one unused U22 slot and the 2 supplemental slots left. So again, now this is where we can talk about, does Annabelle Godoy want to come to Austin on a supplemental senior reserve minimum, right? We have $192,000 in budget space left. So maybe we can give him that, $200,000 contract and use some of that allocation money out of that 192 to buy him down to the supplemental roster and stick him there, right? We know there are little cartwheels Roto can make in the rules here to shift guys around on this roster. We think there could be potentially some of the senior roster guys already here, a Biru or a Heinz Ike, that we could potentially do that with as well. So I don't think we need to dive into, like I said earlier, right, which free agents are we targeting for supplemental slots, right? Which guys, we know there's going to be, more likely than not, some movement, whether it's a buyout, a sale, a trade of some of these existing senior roster slots. But going through this exercise, we have filled the 4 spots here, right, on the senior slot. We have filled 3 spots on the supplemental. We've got 28 players on the first team roster here. We've got all 3 DPs. We've got 2 U22s, so you can, with additional moves that we did not make here in our mock off season, you can potentially bring in that third U22, whether it's this window or in the summer. And again, there's just so many moving parts with potentially Leo going out, a buyout, what have you. But I think this was a pretty fun little kind of walk through what it could look like at least if ZG and E were in charge.
Absolutely. I mean, you talk about priorities, and that's what it's going to come down to when Roto really starts to hit this and try to fill out this roster going forward. And for me, it's DP9. I want to see some younger guys, some U22s that we actually get to fucking play and be excited about. And then, the potential looming buyout of G. Moving on from Leo, I think, the two guys we're looking at that center back position who could be potential either trade or sell targets with Leo and Julio. You would then need to find another center back to replace that. But I think with the amount of money you can open up from moving a guy like Leo, you can go ahead and find two. We could get two Heinz Ikes for that. You get two BHIs for that. So I'd much rather have that roster construction.
Gotcha. So threw this together just before we went live here, just what this kind of depth chart would look like. This is certainly not 100% polished here, but you see striker spot with your DP9, Zardes, Rubio, and our draft pick backing him up there. Right wing, Bukhari, backed up by O'Brien, Gallagher, and Owen Wolf. Left wing, U22 international coming in there, hopefully getting the starting spot, but competing with Obi and Galley and CJ and Owen Wolf. Driussi, of course, in the middle there. You could maybe see Driussi playing on the left wing. I've seen some fan conversations about that. He has played left wing in his career prior to his arrival at Austin FC. So maybe, again, I see the stank face. We'll see. This is just the mock off season as things stand right now, but Driussi, Wolf, Rubio, and Micah Burton there in your kind of attacking mid position. Then your midfielders, Danny and our TAM international midfielder. Of course, Danny can play either of those spots. Owen Wolf can fill in there as well. Irvin Torres in the central midfield, and our U22 international midfielder also in the mix there. And you would think there would probably be some flexibility with your TAM or your U22 there to be able to play in that attacking mid role as well. Then on the back line, Biru, Kolmanich, Gallagher at left back, Dessler, Gallagher, Jimenez at right back, Stuver, Cleveland, Loss in net, Heinz, Ike, and Svodtok are projected starters, Julio and Leo are projected depth at center back. This is a team that, to me, should be competing for a top 4 or 5 spot in the West.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a lot of speculation in regard to how these guys are going to perform with the DP internationals and all that stuff. But you're assuming that you're going to go ahead and get a player who is a quality player. So, this would be an exciting team, honestly. Maybe you want some more midfield depth, honestly. Maybe one of those 22 initiatives is not a winger, and you kind of look for an attacking mid who can kind of play center mid as well. Because I am a bit worried about, obviously this team looks completely different when Seba's injured. But if your backup there is essentially Owen or Diego, that's a bit of a problem. I think that, and this isn't going to get this will never be perfect. Injuries are going to pop up, of course. Guys are going to come in and it's not going to work out and stuff like that. But that's just kind of like where my eyes went after we did this exercise here. But other than that, I'm really satisfied with it. And again, I just think if you can get a top quality 9, you're going to unleash so many of these other guys who have been held back by poor play throughout their entire tenure here with Austin FC. So I think that's got to be the priority. And the names that we've been tied to here with Dukes and everything, that excites me. And it really does.
Shout out to Jimmy. Left him off this depth chart initially. He's also in the mix there, of course, on the right wing. So again, that'll conclude our mock off season here. E, let's real quick. Let's go through the goal of the year bracket because shout out to everybody. E, we had record participation going back through the 2 years. We did it on Twitter. Going back through our first week here in 2024. Shout out to everybody who jumped in, made their voices heard, and is helping us along the way here to crown the goal of the year. Little second round recap. Most dominant goal in terms of the voting here, E. Not as lopsided as some of those first round matchups, but Driussi's 11th minute of stoppage time game winner against San Jose, 84.6% of the vote in that matchup. And then Heinz Ike's 3rd minute of stoppage time winner against Colorado on decision day, 80% of the vote there. And not as close as some of those first round matchups either. The closest matchup in the second round was Driussi's 87th minute game winner against Houston, 60% of the vote against Hader Obrian's second minute of first half stoppage time goal away at LAFC. So we can zoom in here on the YouTube and check out some of these regions. So we had over in the away region, you can see our first 1 seed falls. So Emi Rigoni now eliminated from the competition by Owen Wolf's lone goal at Toronto. 2 goals that were somewhat similar there. But one of them was a Copa Tejas game winner, and it wasn't the one that advanced. So I got to say, I'm a little bit surprised about the result of that matchup.
I'm definitely a little bit surprised there. Definitely a little bit bummed because, like, that is the one thing from Emi's career that we can really just latch onto and be like, he got this fucking game winner versus those bastards.
Yeah.
That Seba goal is going to be tough to take down. I mean, that's, not just like this year alone. That's one of the greatest all-time goals in club history. Like, that was, I mean, you fucking cried. So like that is going to be a tough one. Obviously, you've been listening, where my top choice is with Biru here, and yes, I am very biased.
Yeah, so he's firing up the propaganda machine here on episode 187. Biru's 67th minute equalizing goal, or actually that was to take the lead at the moment. That's 67th minute against the Quakes. That's the 3 seed in the Vibes region taking on the 1 seed, Heinz Ikes. So far, dominant game winner on decision day. So we have, going through this bracket, you can see the Verde region there as well. And what is left, we have 3 of the 1 seeds remaining here in the quarterfinal round, the final 8, the Elite 8, if you will. We've got 1 of the 2 seeds left, 1 of the 3 seeds left. Then we've got a 5 seed and 2 7 seeds remaining here in the quarterfinal round. So as you are listening to this, on Sunday or throughout the week, voting for the quarterfinal round is open right now at thenorthendpodcast.com. You have until next Saturday to cast your votes here and get your favorite goals into the Final Four. Semifinal round preview will happen on next week's episode.
Hell yeah, dude. This is fun. I'm super happy that we're breaking some records here with the votes and everything.
Yeah, it's awesome to see the interest in this exercise continuing to grow year over year. So once again, shout out to all of the North End faithful who are participating in helping us out, helping us get through this lengthy offseason together. Closing it out here today, we know that the Academy was taking on Sporting KC last weekend, and we recorded on Saturday, so we've got those results now. The 13s lost 3-0, but had 3 players that were playing up. Plus, it was a friendly with an older team. The Dragons, not sure where they're from. Then the U14s were playing SKC. That's probably why you move some of those guys up to play that other MLS Academy. U14s 1-0 win over SKC. Toby, the striker, stole the ball in the box, dribbled the keeper, and put it in for the win. U15s 2-2 draw over SKC. Great game. And we dominated, but countered both times they scored, or that we scored rather. So the 2-2 draw there. And I believe this weekend's action was against FC Dallas. So very interested to see those results come in. And we'll talk about them next week. Keep it up, boys.
Absolutely. Go get them, boys.
All right, E, anything else for you here on episode 187 before we shut it down?
Lakers.
Oh, my God.
This one's for you, Lojo.
That'll do it, everybody. Oh, those 2 are for him, I guess. Yeah. That'll do it, everybody. Here on episode 187 of the North End Podcast. Thanks for tuning in, sticking with us. We will be back next weekend with another episode breaking down everything that happens in the Austin FC universe between now and then. Enjoy your week, everybody. We will do the same. We'll see you back here next week. Until then, he is E, and I'm Zach. Vamos Austin FC, everybody. Goodbye.